Until you get to the last 4 or 5 chapters, they're more of a challenge. The first chapters are more of devotional and historical. Daniel is a lot like Joseph. He's one of these guys that went to a far country and was elevated up high up and lived a real good life. And he, like David, I don't know of anything he did wrong. Unlike Joseph, I mean. Joseph was a man who lived as good a life as any man. I don't know of any failure of Joseph, and Daniel and Joseph just alike in that regard. The book of Daniel, and that's what we're going to be jumping into tonight, and we'll cover a couple of chapters probably at least. And I've really struggled about how to do this. We're going to have prayer in a minute, but I've really struggled how to do it because there's sections here of the dream, the interpretation, the lions, and what all that transpires. So it's not like an exegetical verse by verse study, but I'm going to try to do the best I can, and hopefully you all will, and all of us will enjoy. But let's have prayer first. Father, thank you for the opportunity to gather tonight. It's so good to be in church and to be here among our brothers and sisters, and Lord, to study your word. Thank you for the Bible and for its scripture and for the truth. I pray, God, that you'd help us to understand it, to learn from it. Help us to look at Daniel and to see him and to see the man he was and to appreciate what a godly man can accomplish in life. And from him may we learn how to live better lives too. And as you as you have anointed your word and inspired it, may you inspire us as we open the book and interpret it and apply it to the lives in which we're living. Thank you, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen. The third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, he had 3 years of reigning as a king. And, how did it come out? Excuse me, y'all, I got to talk. How bad? 7-3. I left early. Sorry, y'all, I had to get a report. You ought to heard this. You ought to heard Quentin yelling at the umpire today. It was embarrassing. Anyway, Jehoiakim reigned in Jerusalem for 3 years. It's not a long time. Of course, our presidents reigned for 4, and that's all some of them ever reigned. But he was in his 3rd year when Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians came in and attacked the city of Jerusalem in Israel. It was right around 600 B.C., so a little after 600 B.C., Nebuchadnezzar took the land of Israel. He destroyed Jerusalem, leveled it, and destroyed, killed most of the people. But according to this passage, Nebuchadnezzar had issued an order that they capture the young people. Let's read some of the verses and we'll go from there. Beginning in verse, look at verse 2. He's going to steal articles from God's house, from the temple. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar's won the battle. And then with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the articles to the treasure house of his God. Now that's about all we're going to read about that. But Nebuchadnezzar is going to take these holy vessels out of the temple, take them to his place of idolatry, and later they're going to come to play after Nebuchadnezzar's gone and Belshazzar's on the throne. Because Belshazzar is going to bring these articles out in chapter 5 or 6 it is, in chapter 5, and he's going to mock them. He's going to abuse them, and he's going to die that very night for doing such a terrible thing. Nebuchadnezzar, before I go any further, is a mystery because on one hand, he's an idolater. On another hand, another day, he's worshiping God. He's a man who turns to Jehovah and praises him to the highest, and then he'll build an idol to himself. He is a man who's schizophrenic, to say the least. Nebuchadnezzar is quite a character. They take the holy vessels out of the temple, but that's not all they take. In verse 3, the Bible says, Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs. Now, some of your translations will say his chief of staff. Does anybody see that? You do? So the master of his eunuch the chief of staff. Probably his chief of staff is a eunuch. And they were common in those days. Gratefully, they're not common anymore. But he told his chief of staff to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. That was a long sentence. But the king says, look, we don't want the riffraff. We want the most promising. So you go to the chief of staff, he said, you capture the descendants of the king, the descendants of all the nobles. In other words, all the wealthy class young people. If they're healthy, if they're good looking, if they have ability to learn, if they appear to have some wisdom, you capture them and you bring them back to Babylon, and we're going to train them in the Chaldean language, and they're going to serve us. So the king. Nebuchadnezzar is a sharp guy. You see what he's doing. He wants to bring these young, smart, educated, and soon-to-be educated young people so they can help lead his nation and make a better people out of his own people. So that's what the eunuch does. That's what the chief of staff does. They capture all these young people. Now, in 606 BC, these young people were probably teenagers. The only ones we know is Daniel, and then the three that will be known. You know their names: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's their Babylonian name, and we know them by their Babylonian name. Those four are the ones we're going to know. But there were many, many more like them, young, handsome, promising, that were captured, and they're teenagers. Can you imagine an army coming in and capturing our teenagers and taking them to another country and raising them as their own? For a mom, it's unthinkable, and for a dad as well. Well, that's what happened. They destroyed the city, they destroyed the country, they won the battle because God gave the nation over to Babylon, and then they capture all these young people and they take them back to Babylon. And you know, Daniel will never see Israel again. He'll never go home. As a teenager, now how long is he going to live? He's going to live to be 100 years old or more. He's going to live his entire life in Babylon. And to tell you ahead, this is more of an introduction tonight, he's going to live under 4 different nations or rulers, 4 different countries. He's going to live under the Babylonian rule, under the Persian rule, under the Grecian rule, and then under the Roman rule. He's going to go from being a teenager to being an old man, and the whole time he's going to be in the leadership of the nation in all four entities. When the Persians come in, he's still going to be up here. When the others come, he's still going to be up here. God has placed him there for a reason. And when God marks a man for a leadership or a woman, God's way is going to be done. And God does that. And he did that with Joseph when he said that his brothers sought it for his bad, but I sought it for your good. And that's what's going on here with Daniel. Daniel will live a good life. Probably in many ways a better life there than he would live in Israel. Who knows what would have happened to him in Israel. But he's going to spend his whole life in the far country. And I'm sure the first days of it, the first weeks or months of it were very difficult. There's no doubt that he was homesick. No doubt he wanted to go home. No doubt he missed his family. But he didn't have his mom and dad. Didn't have his brothers and sisters. He was there alone with all the other young people that were captured and taken to Babylon. Okay, so they're taken back to Babylon, and in verse 5, look at it. The king, Nebuchadnezzar, appointed for them a daily provision from the king's house, wine which he drank, food which he ate. And 3 years he appointed for them to be trained. So all these young people are going to go to school for 3 years at the university. He's putting these teenagers in a private school. Oh, well, no, it's a state school because the state sponsors it. And so they're being housed, most probably, in Babylon. It's like a university campus, most probably. They have a cafeteria that provides the same food the king himself eats in the palace. They drink the best wine that the king would drink in his palace. And so the king is wanting to... why is he doing that? Why is he providing such food? There's 2 reasons. One, he wants them to learn to love Babylon. He's trying to win them over. He wants them to get out of the homesick mode and get away from Israel in mind and body. And he's trying to give them the best he can so they can really learn to live in Babylon. The other had another reason. What was it? The second reason was so that they would, I guess, be more anxious to study, and because of the better food and the like, they would be more apt to study and have more energy and to be the leaders that he wanted. And now the food that he serves is going to be food that has first been offered to idols in his idolatrous temple. That's where the food comes from. So before the king gets his great food, they've taken it to his place of worship and have offered it as a sacrifice to the god that doesn't exist. And when they do that, then they bring the food and they offer it to the king. He eats it, and now these young people are eating it. And that causes a problem. Daniel doesn't want to eat food offered to idols. And he's in a bind. Now, I wondered what he was thinking when he first realized what was happening. He and his 3 friends. By the way, his 3 friends, let me give you their names. Their names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, we don't know those names, but they're the names of the 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those 3 men, I believe they have the same faith that Daniel had. I believe those 4 were just as equal as they could be. We hear more about Daniel than we do those 3, but those 3, man, they're there sometimes by themselves, and we're going to see it here later on, where they stand up for God at risk of their very lives. And all 4 of these young men, when they hear that they're going to be treated like the king, did not want to be treated like the king. They didn't want to eat that food. It's hard to turn down a ribeye steak and a baked potato with a Coca-Cola with ice up to the brim. It's hard to give up the best food there is. It's hard to give up Becky Roach's fish. And they have the best food. And I'm telling you, it's cooked by the best cooks. And they say no. Daniel and his 3 friends all agree they don't want it because it's food. Isn't it great when we got Deacon and Emily here tonight, huh? And they're here. You didn't want me to say it, I know, but they're here. Isn't it great and there's Wyatt. How can I forget Wyatt? Oh, there's Ryan. I didn't see you, Ryan. Who else is here? I don't want to forget nobody. We got these 4 great young people. Look, we got one right here, the best one I hear. But when you see young people who love the Lord Jesus and who are in church every Sunday, and these guys are in church every Sunday, it means something, doesn't it? You guys don't know what it means to us old folks when we see y'all. Because you all know the Lord. You appear to love Him and serve Him. Well, these 4 young people, they had that love for God in Jerusalem, and they carried it with them to Babylon. And in that far country, they're not going to compromise. They're not going to give in. They're away from home now. If any Christian is going to give in, it's going to be when they're away from home. If any Christian compromises, it's going to be when they're away from home and nobody knows where they're at. You know, that happens. And it's sad. I'm worried about this Branson group. I'm worried to death about them going to Branson and forgetting who they are. But hopefully they won't do it. Chris, you watch it when you get over there.
I was like, you're with the preacher. Y'all
But anyway, they're there, and they refuse to compromise. Young people, don't ever compromise, right? Don't ever compromise. Remember who you are. You all are better than those who compromise. And huh?
In verse 8, it said Daniel determined not to be defiled.
That's right.
And that's why it's important for us to teach this to them. Know it's pure before you go into a situation.
He was determined as he went into it. He was not going to do anything to compromise. You know, Rennie sees a lot of students that are in that category, in that they're in the BCM, and there's many of them are right with God. Not all of them, but many of them are. And you see some great kids. But Daniel's, man, he's special. He is a hero in the Christian faith. With 3 years of training, 3 years of eating, he's got a pretty good life coming ahead of him. And by the way, that 3 years of training was so they could be trained to serve the king. They're being educated to be, what do you call it? There's a term for it. I didn't write it down. When you go work at the Capitol. Interns. Assistants to the congressman and president. You know, they're aides. And aides. They're being trained to work in government. And so for 3 years, they're going to learn how the government works and how Babylon does their government and where they can then be put into places of leadership and service. Because there's have y'all ever heard that there's a lot of people who work for the government? Have y'all heard that lately? It takes a lot of people to run the government. Not as many as we thought it did. But it takes a lot of people to run the government. And that's what these guys are doing. They're learning to work in the government. There was a lot who did. Yeah. Now, let's go down to verse 8. Daniel purposed in his heart, he was determined, that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now, God had, the next verse says what I was about to say, brought Daniel into favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. So the chief of staff, or the chief of the eunuchs, was a friend of Daniel's now. God did it. God somehow brought those two together, and Daniel trusted him, and he went to him and he said to him, hey, I got a problem. Let me tell you a quick story. I was at the end of AT one year at Fort Polk, and I'm the chaplain of the battalion. Colonel Sally is our battalion commander. Can't remember right now. I know the command sergeant major's name, but I can't think of it. But we're at the officer's call. Now listen to this real quick. It relates to this. We're at officer's call, and all the officers of the battalion are there. And among the officers are about 6 or 8 second lieutenants, brand new second lieutenants. Some out of ROTC, some of them graduated from the OCS program that I was part of. And they're there at officers' call. I hate to tell you this, but I have to tell the story. There are things the military does that we don't like. One of them is to initiate second lieutenants. And what they did was poured alcohol to initiate a second lieutenant into a boot. Now, normally it's into a dirty boot after the weeks of training. But this time they got a new boot, and they poured alcohol into the boots. And the second lieutenants are going to drink out of the boot. It's a lowly thing. It's an initiation. Well, I noticed among the crowd, these about 3, maybe 4 of them now, I think there were 4, they began to ease from both sides of me to me. And I'm looking and I'm wondering what they're coming to me, and I had met them, and they came up to me and they said, Chaplain, what are we supposed to do? I said, well, what's the problem? He said, we don't drink. And they knew that they can't just walk up there and say, I'm not doing it because I'm a Christian. They have a career ahead of them too. And said, what are we supposed to do? I said, don't drink. Just don't drink. Don't drink. And I went up to Colonel Sally and said, Colonel, we got a minor problem. He said, what's that, Chaplain? He said, sir, not everybody drinks. You got to be kidding. That's his response. Colonel Sally was a super good man. I loved Colonel Sally. And I said, sir, I don't. And we got some second lieutenants that don't drink, and we can't force them to drink. I got it covered, Chaplain. Don't you worry about it. He brought out the other new boot, poured in some Sprite into the boot. Everybody saw him do it, and everybody knew that Sprite was in that boot and alcohol was in the other. And these 4 guys walked up with their head high, and they were initiated as second lieutenants. You see, sometimes we're in a spot. He's in a spot here. He says, now wait a minute. He says to the chief steward, I got a problem. I don't eat this stuff. I got a problem. I don't drink this wine. And now I don't know what would have happened to those 4 second lieutenants if I hadn't been there. But I believe God put me there for them that day because they didn't have anybody else to go to, and they were scared of Colonel Sally. So, I mean, every second lieutenant scared of the battalion commander. And so God put me there. Well, God put the steward with Daniel. And Daniel says to him, I got a problem. I don't drink this wine, and I don't eat this food. And he says to the steward, I got an idea. Daniel told him, I'm not going to read it all. I'm just going to tell you what he said. He said, I've got an idea. Said, let's see. He says, I've got an idea that if you would allow me and my 3 friends to eat, he says, pulse. What verse is that? 12. He says, please test your servants for 10 days and let them give us pulse and water to drink. That doesn't sound very good. But the word pulse, I researched it, it's vegetables. Let us eat peas and cornbread. Let us eat vegetables and drink water for 10 days, just 10 days. And this was not sent to the king. This was just between them and the chief of staff. Now, the chief of staff had said earlier to Daniel, y'all got to eat because if you don't, I'm going to be in trouble. Said, if I present you 3 or you 4 to the king and you are thin, you look worse than the rest of them, and the king asks why you look bad, and he finds out that I hadn't fed you his food and his wine, you know what the chief steward said? My head is on the chopping block. You know, there's been times in this world, life was real serious. And even the chief of staff, that's like Trump's right-hand man. The chief of staff here says, I'd lose my head if you 3-4 guys don't look as good as the rest of them. So he was worried about it. He said, I can't let you do it. So that's when Daniel says, just give me 10 days. Give us 10 days, and if we don't look good enough and we don't look better, then we'll go from there. Daniel is a man of faith, and he's doing a young man of faith, a boy of faith, and he's doing out of pure faith what God, I believe, has led him to do. He says, let us then let our appearance be examined, and the appearance of the young men who eat the king's food, and compare us then. And so then in verse 15, at the end of the 10 days, you know that chief of steward was nervous the whole time because he didn't know what was going to happen after the 10 days. But I know somebody that wasn't nervous. His name is Daniel. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were confident they were going to be okay. But at the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Thus the steward took away their portion of delicacies and the wine and gave them vegetables. So for the next 3 years, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego ate black-eyed peas, purple-hulled peas, cabbage, cornbread, and that kind of food, and did not eat any of the delicacies from the king's table. Huh? Oh, I'm sorry. But For 3 years they ate. This happened for 3 solid years. And so their appearance kept getting better. They're going to be the handsomest 4 men in the whole school. And there, that is a work of God. Y'all got any comments or anything?
I've heard this story
Yeah,
my
yeah.
entire life, and I never knew why the food was. I just assumed that it was like from a split hoof, or
Oh, uh-huh.
I never knew that it was offered to idols
Yeah.
before it was offered to them.
Yeah.
I never knew why
Mhm.
he wasn't. I mean, I knew that he wouldn't eat it because of his faith, but I
Mhm.
didn't know what caused
Mhm.
it. And I may be the only one.
No, it's not spelled out in the chapter, but that's it's a common practice to offer food to the idols, and followers of God would not do that, and that's the only reason Daniel would have, and as a result, he's going to. What he proves here, it's better to follow God and do things God's way than man's way, even to the king. The most lavish food you could have is not as good as what God would do for you if you follow Him in faith. God's way is better than our ways.
In my Bible, verse 3 of Daniel,
Mm-hmm.
chapter 1,
Yeah.
when he talks about the minister, or the name you said, and then it says the minister of his, I wish I could be, I can't pronounce it.
Which verse are you talking about?
3,
Oh, then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel. Yeah, that's just the name of the chief of staff. I didn't mention it a while ago because I can't say it either. Let's go on down now to verse 17. As for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in visions and dreams. God is preparing Daniel for what comes ahead. Now, he's going to have an experience, and I can't wait to get to the interpretation of his dream, of Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. Daniel has a gift. You can't interpret a dream unless you have an interpretation. And not only did Daniel have an interpretation, I'm going to jump ahead and tell you, Daniel even told the king what his dream was before the king told him. That's a gift. That God put Daniel in this place for this time and for this reason. And now at the end of the days, when the king had said they should be brought in, I'm assuming this is after the 3 years. Okay, at the end of days, he demands these people to be brought in. The chief of staff, or the eunuchs, brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And before I forget to say it, I'll say it now. There are those who believe that Daniel and his 3 friends were eunuchs because of the chief of eunuchs. I don't believe it. I don't believe they were. I believe that the chief of staff happened to have been a eunuch, but I don't believe all the people that worked under the king would be that. But that could be, I don't know. Now, then the king interviewed them. He interviewed them. See, he's looking for people to work for the government. He's looking for employees. And he interviewed them, and among them, he found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He found these 4. They stood out above all of them. And therefore they served before the king. So he gave them the best jobs in the government. And all the matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were already in his realm. Thus Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. Cyrus is the king of Persia, who's going to take over and destroy and capture the Babylonian kingdom. And Daniel is going to reign under Nebuchadnezzar, rule under Nebuchadnezzar as the number 2 guy in the state, as I could understand it, until the end of the kingdom. Chapter 1 ends, and it was a victorious chapter. They came in as captives in Babylon, and now they are elevated in chapter 1 all the way up to the top of the heap. All right. Chapter 2 is the dream. I don't know, I hope we have time. Yeah. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And this dream, and I didn't tell you at the beginning, the first 5, 6 chapters have to do with dreams and visions and lions. The next chapters have to do with the end times, the book of Revelation, the signs of the end time, the Antichrist. So we'll get to that in due time. But Nebuchadnezzar has a dream in chapter 2, and it bothers him. In verse 1 of chapter 2, now in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. And in the second year of his reign, I'm not going to get into the chronology and the time schedule, but I don't know if it was an old dream he had that had lingered on for a while, or if it was a dream after Daniel came into the kingdom. But his spirit was troubled, and he lost sleep over the dream. It bothered him. And so the king had a great idea. He said, I'm going to call my magicians and my astrologers. I'm going to call my sorcerers. And I want them to tell me what my dream meant. Dreams meant something in those days. I can't say they don't mean something today. It is very possible that God will give you a dream that has a purpose or a meaning. But I would hesitate to say that all dreams would do that. They don't. Most dreams, 99.9% of them, are just dreams that come into our subconscious when we're asleep. But Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and his dreams meant something. God put these dreams in his head, and he knew it. Nebuchadnezzar knew these dreams meant something because he was troubled by it. And so they came, and these magicians and sorcerers stood before the king, and the king said to them, I had a dream. You ever heard that? I have a dream. I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the meaning. And the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell us your dream, and we will give you the interpretation. Can you pick out a shyster in a crowd? The king is face to face with a whole bunch of shysters here. Tell us your dream. I'll tell you what it means. The king answered, though. The king was smarter than they were. My decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, hear what he said. If you don't tell me what my dream is and give me the interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces. Their heads on the chopping block now. Your houses will be made an ash heap. In other words, your families won't have anywhere to live. But if you tell me the dream and its interpretation, you'll receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, tell me my dream and its interpretation. Wow. Can you imagine? These shysters can always interpret a dream. I'm trying to think of a connection or an example. The preacher in the pulpit. I saw in seminary we would see videos of all kinds of healers and services and things, and y'all may have heard them and been there. One would stand in the pulpit and say, I know God brought somebody, there's somebody in this sanctuary today who's got a bad back. You know who you are. I don't know who you are, but you know who you are. And God brought you here. That you get up and come down here and we'll heal you. You know, that's a shyster. I mean, how many bad backs are in church on Sunday morning? 9 out of 10. Well, these dreamers are saying, hey, just tell us what it is and we'll tell you. He says, no. You tell me the dream. Well, they're in a bind now. How can you tell somebody what they dreamed last night if they haven't told you? And these magicians said to him in verse 7, let the king, you tell us, your servants, the dream, and we'll give you the interpretation. They argued with him. And the king answered and said, I know for certain that you would yet gain time because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there's only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak living and corrupt words before me till the time has changed. Therefore, you tell me the dream, and I'll know that you can give me its interpretation? And they said, finally, look at verse 10. The magicians and sorcerers, there's not a man on earth who can tell the king. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such a thing of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh. So they said, King, we can't do this. Nobody can do this. You're asking of us the impossible. And so the king was angry. Just to summarize, he commanded to destroy all these men. The wise men, sorcerers, magicians were put to death. And they began to kill them all. Now, guess who's among those numbers? Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They are in that category. And so they sought Daniel to kill him and the three men to kill them. And God's going to save them by the skin of their teeth. Verse 14. Then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had come out to kill him, and answered and said, why is the decree from the king so urgent? Why are you so urgent to kill us? Then he made the decision known to Daniel. The king had wanted his dream interpreted. Daniel went in. He had obviously an open door to the king and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house. What did Daniel do first before we go any further? What's Daniel going to do? Pray. He's going to pray. Before Daniel does anything else, he's going to pray. Daniel is a man of prayer. And his prayer life comes out several times in these chapters. And this time, he goes and he gets Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're all going to die unless they come through with an answer. And they seek God, the God of heaven, concerning this dream, and so that they would not perish like the rest of them. And God revealed to Daniel the secret in verse 19. The secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. God gave Daniel the same dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. It wasn't a dream for Daniel. It was a dream of Nebuchadnezzar's that God gave Daniel. So Daniel knew what it was. How did he know? Here Daniel's asleep. He has a dream. Well, he has the meaning. God tells him in the dream what it is. It's how he knows. And so Daniel answers and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever. For wisdom and might are His, and He changes the times and the seasons. He goes on and gives an eloquent praise to God. He said, God be praised. He can change the time. He can change the season. He removes kings and He raises kings up. He gives wisdom to those who are wise. He gives knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows in the darkness what is, and the light dwells with Him. I thank You, He said, and I praise You, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have made known to me what we ask of You, for You have made known to us the king's demand. That praise of God from Daniel is absolutely beautiful. And before he does anything else, he gives thanks to God. And he just gives Him great praise. And so, Daniel goes to the chief of the guards and tells him that we know the dream and the interpretation. Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon anymore. Stop doing it. And I'll tell the king about his dream. And so Arioch quickly brought Daniel to the king. Now he's going to save a lot of lives, not just him and the three others. And he says to the king, the Arioch says, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to you, O king, the dream. And the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? And Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded that the wise men, astrologers, and the like cannot declare to you, but there is a God in heaven. That's what he says. He says, but there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. And at this point, he's going to tell what the dream is. So if you haven't read this chapter, here's the dream that Nebuchadnezzar has dreamed. He says, he says in verse 31, O king, behold, a great image. You have seen a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you. Its form was awesome. The image's head was made of fine gold. Its chest and arms of silver. Its belly and thighs of bronze. Its legs were made of iron. Its feet were made partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone, here's a dream now, you watched this image while a stone was cut without hands. Now, I have a trouble visualizing that, but a stone was cut without hands, which struck the image on the feet, on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. So what happened? This piece of stone was cut without hands. It fell and hit the feet of this image and crushed the feet of iron and clay. Have you ever heard the phrase feet of clay? That's where this comes from. Feet of clay means what? It means weak. He's not strong. Well, that's where that very phrase comes from. Then the iron and clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors, like the wind carries them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone struck the image. The stone that struck the image became a great mountain. The stone that fell became a mountain that filled the earth. That was the dream. Anybody want to interpret it? I mean, that's the dream he dreamed, but he also has the meaning of the dream. And so he's not only going to interpret it, he's told the king what the king dreamed. And here is the dream, verse 36. We will now tell you the interpretation, O king. You, O king, are a king of kings. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom. He's given you power, strength, and glory. He has given all this into your hand. He has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. Okay? You have an image. The head is made of gold. And Daniel says, you are the head of gold on the image. But after you shall rise another kingdom that will be inferior to yours. Then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything, and like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all others. That's the interpretation. Anybody know what it means? Y'all still with me? Mike? Yeah. Yes. Rome. That's right. That's exactly right. He's referring to Persia first, Greece, and then Rome. Then he's going to refer to the kingdom of Christ. That will be forever, eventually here. He says, whereas you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom's going to be divided, iron and clay. Yet the strength of iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. The clay is fragile, the iron is strong. Feet of clay means fragile. It says, as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. It don't work. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. Here it is, which will what? Never be destroyed. Who's he talking about there? He's talking about the Davidic kingdom, the kingdom of Jesus Christ. All the kingdoms of earth are going to be done away with, and one day there's only one kingdom, and that's the kingdom of Christ, the kingdom of God. And he said, there shall not be, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. So there will be no more Greece, no more Rome, no more Persia, no more Babylon. It's all going to be the kingdom of Christ. Inasmuch then, king, as you saw the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and gold, the great God has made known to the king what would come to pass. The dream is certain, and the interpretation is true. So what Daniel has just done, not only has he interpreted the dream and given the dream itself, he's told the king his days are limited. And that's something you don't want to do either. But he has told them exactly what's going to happen. And Nebuchadnezzar has just been told that God gave him this kingdom he has, but God's going to take it away from him. He doesn't say when, but it's going to be pretty soon. Nebuchadnezzar will fall. He will, of course, it's going to be a little ways from now, but his kingdom is coming to an end. Y'all got any comment or question about any of this?
Yeah, I got one other question, but you were talking about really the stone that was cut out without hands.
Uh-huh.
The stone is Christ, okay? He was called the cornerstone.
Okay.
That's what I believe. I think it's what
Okay. I think that's a great observation.
he wasn't cut out by human hands. He didn't come to fruition through a man and a woman. He came through God himself.
I think you're absolutely right. He is the chief cornerstone. Yep. The stumbling block. I think that's fantastic. I think that is right on. I wished I'd said it before you did.
I told you about it before and you forgot it.
Huh?
I told you about it before and you forgot it.
You told me about it before?
When we came in, I talked to you about it, told you to make sure you say this, and you just forgot.
Oh, yeah, okay. But that if with that flavor to this, with that addition, can you see that? The kingdom of Babylon has become subservient to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and he's going to bring it to an end. He's going to bring the others to an end, and they're all going to be weaker than Babylon. They're still going to overcome Babylon, but they're still going to be weaker kingdoms until the last kingdom, which is the kingdom of Christ. And that is absolutely true. That makes perfect sense. Let's see. Again, the four kingdoms: Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And the last one is Rome, and that's when I believe the Antichrist is going to be coming in. The Antichrist is going to revive at least a portion of the Roman Empire, and that may be that's part of this. But the other part, the divided kingdom, might come in too when at the end of the first 3.5 years, the Antichrist divides the religious Babylon from the state Babylon, and starts persecuting the Jews and the Christians severely. But we'll get to that later. Y'all got anything else to add to the chapters 1 and 2? Uh-huh. Second Kings chapter 24. Mm-hmm.
Now, who was Manasseh? He was a king. Right?
Yeah. He was a bad one. He was a wicked king.
And he was the one that was, don't they
He might have. I don't recall it. But I remember that Manasseh may be the worst of the worst kings of Israel. He was horrible.
But Jehoiakim, his dad was Josiah, which brought back
Yeah.
worship.
Yeah, it's true.
But it says there in
Josiah followed Manasseh. After Manasseh did all the ungodly, idolatrous, then Josiah came back and restored the kingdom, I believe, of worship, to worship.
But it said here in 2 Kings 24, it says, surely these things happened to Judah, which that's where Daniel and them was from, according to the Lord's command, in order to remove them from his presence because of the sins of Manasseh and all he had done. And there was shedding of innocent blood, for he had filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord was not willing to forgive. So that gives us the background of why they went into captivity. If you just think about Daniel and his three friends, if Russia came in here, everyone in this church would have bad feelings toward Russia. And then they're going to take me into their kingdom and try to get me to convert over to them.
Yeah.
That depended on Daniel and them. Like Ring was saying, he was determined.
Yeah.
So really that shows us
Yeah.
that we have to take a stand.
And it can be done, can't it? Because Daniel did. I mean, they did not compromise. Now, what happened to the rest of them, we don't know. More than likely, they compromised.
But some people don't want to get involved, and I don't want to go down that road about politically.
About,
Politically,
yeah.
they don't want to get involved in politics in the nation, but it's our job to stand up for what's right.
I have, yeah.
Was living in an evil kingdom, and he still maintained his devotion to God.
Yeah. And you know, we're going to see where his devotion to God rubs off on Nebuchadnezzar. There's times Nebuchadnezzar looks and acts like a Christian, a godly man. I mean, he's going to do some good stuff later. He goes up and down like a lot of Baptists. but Daniel rubs off on him. Daniel influences Nebuchadnezzar really good, and because he doesn't compromise.
You got one question, and I'll shut up. Next week, we're going to talk about the statue.
Yeah.
Do you think Nebuchadnezzar took this dream interpretation and turned around and built a statue based on that?
It's possible. I didn't think he did, but he might have. I think he just went through an ego, but it's possible. I'm going to research that some more. But right after this, he praises God, and then he builds a statue to himself. So I don't know. He might have, but I don't know why he would do it. But I'm gonna check that out to see if anybody else thinks that. I haven't read anyone that does yet, but that may have. But Nebuchadnezzar talks out of both sides of his mouth. He praises the God of Daniel, and then he'll go and build a statue to himself. And then, but he's also a weak man because his lower level folks are going to come into him and say, Nebuchadnezzar, you deserve to be worshipped, and you need to send out a decree that everybody worships you, worships this image and nothing else, and he'll do it. And so I don't know. Sometimes I think the people we put around us, and we trust them, we get influenced far too easily. And but you said something a second ago about the political involvement of Daniel. Daniel was involved politically. And I've heard ever since my first sermon almost, keep politics out of the church. And here, I believe this for a long time. It may be too late now, but I believe going ever far back we can go, when the church took politics out of itself, they gave the state freedom to do its thing. And the church lost its influence and control. I think the church needs to have more influence over politics. But the problem in the church today is we have people on both sides of politics. And if you preach something about politics, somebody's going to be offended because they're on either side. That should never be the case. If we are Christians and we speak the truth, and the state is to be this in the eyes of God, like Daniel, everybody ought to be on the same page. But we've let it go so long that we really can't bring in now without issues. At least that's what I feel right now. I had folks at DeQuincy got mad at me because I preached a sermon and I mentioned a country without borders is no country at all. And this guy finally told me, he said, don't we believe we ought not have borders? And you said we do. I said, well, he later left the church because I asked him to. But see, you preach politics, you're going to get somebody that don't think we need borders. If any of you don't think we need borders, please don't tell me. I don't think that makes sense.
I saw a meme the other day that said Jesus was a carpenter. He would have helped build the world.
But honestly, if the church had maintained political commitment on the truth, we'd have a better government right now.
I also think that after our study of Revelation, that you kind of see it unfolding,
Mm-hmm.
God's plan unfolding for His return.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of this is having to happen, although we don't particularly care for it. I don't think we're supposed to.
Right.
We're supposed to be like Daniel, we're supposed to stand firm with what we believe. But the return of Jesus and the things that He prophesied in Revelation happen.
It's got to happen. You're right.
So whether we like it or not,
Yeah,
we still have to stand firm in what we believe.
that's right.
It's like Daniel, but the things still have to happen
Mm-hmm. That's right.
for Jesus to come back.
But y'all, what Daniel did here and later when he prays in public, that wasn't easy to do. I mean, y'all try it. I mean, if you're ever in a place where people aren't favorable to Christian practice, try to get on your knees and pray. I mean, just think about how hard it is. If there's a persuasion against you to do what you believe you ought to do, it's easy not to do it. So anyway, thank y'all for coming tonight. This is a great crowd, and I appreciate y'all so much. I hope our study hopefully is helpful. I'm not a good teacher. I do the best I can, and I'm very limited, very, very limited. Very.